So if I were to lay out to someone who wasn't already a believer the fundamental tenets of Judaism or Islam or the Mormon faith or Roman Catholicism or Seventh-day Adventism, anyone who wasn't already a believer would find it absolutely ridiculous. If I said, oh, the angel Moroni came down here and buried these plates of gold, or that there were these 2 million people who were led through the desert and led through the Red Sea, and God provided food and water for them for 40 years when they lived in the desert, or God sent his only begotten son to come to earth to die on a cross to save you from your sins. Anyone who doesn't already buy into that narrative would find it ridiculous. And so too, anyone who doesn't buy into the liberal narrative about how our great fight is against ignorance and bigotry is going to find these manifestations ridiculous. But every cause looks ridiculous to someone who's not a true believer. I don't think most people realize how much we depend on non-rational sources for our meaning. I mean, when I'm talking, doing my live stream and speaking to 15 live viewers, I have a vastly exaggerated sense of my own significance. I mean, I don't think, in the end, 400 people are going to watch this stream and another 100 are going to listen to an MP3, and maybe 5 of them are going to find something, really significant in what I have to say. I would feel crushed by my own insignificance, and I'd probably give up. Instead, I have this vastly exaggerated sense of the importance of what I'm doing, and almost everyone does. I mean, we deal with people with Napoleon complexes, in the workplace often. They have, one particular task, and everyone has to go through them to get something done. And these people are strutting around. Like, men, of course, imbue their work with all sorts of absurd levels of meaning that it just objectively doesn't have. So I don't see the wokeness as any more absurd inherently than any other yearning for meaning. Where I do agree with you is that it's definitely trashing our country. So there are a lot of pursuits of meaning and significance that are not trashing our country. But the woke summer of George and its after effects leading to the deaths of thousands of innocent Americans through all sorts of horrible means, whether automobile accidents, pedestrian accidents, or murder. I mean, that is just horrific. So someone who believes something about the angel and the Mormon faith, they're not killing people, but people who push the narrative that the cops are just inherently racist and America's inherently racist, holding down the basic inherent goodness of black people, they are pushing a narrative that's responsible for the deaths of thousands of innocent people a year.
Mm-hmm. Well, talking about narratives being pushed in politics, there is this thing in the media about Christian nationalism taking over the GOP, American politics. I think it's greatly overstated. I think one actually has to define Christian nationalism very carefully before saying much of anything about it. To me, it is the desire for a theocracy, in which case there's a state church, and it's a variant of Christianity, and it informs every aspect of this nation state's public policy. Very few people in the GOP want that, although the media makes it seem like Christian nationalism's on the march everywhere. I mean, you see your people like a Gab, Andrew Torba saying X, Y, and Z. They call themselves Christian nationalists. I believe that Marjorie Greene did the same, and Lauren Boebert questioned the separation between church and state. But other than people like this, you barely ever hear about it, except, on CNN and such, where they say it's coming to kill everyone. What do you think about this matter, Luke?
Right. So many things to say. I was only once in my life trapped in a riptide, and I was swimming in Brisbane, Australia, and I kept swimming to get back to the beach, and I just kept getting pulled further away.
Uh-huh.
So we're in a riptide right now. The left has steadily gained control of all of our major institutions. So to try to preserve your way of life, you have to swim a lot harder than you would in 1950s America. So that's probably the first way that I understand Christian nationalism. It's an attempt by many ordinary Americans who 50 years ago would not have identified as Christian nationalists, but in these particular circumstances, that is the way they see is the best to try to preserve, something of their way of life. Like every living organism devotes itself to trying to reshape the environment around it so that it's most conducive for its own flourishing. That means sharks and beetles and ants and people, and Christians and Jews, we're all trying to shape our environment so it's most conducive to our welfare. And so Christians who see a United States of America that now makes gay marriage the law of the land, where many of our elite institutions think the transsexual agenda is a wonderful thing, and that people who feel like they're a member of the opposite sex, that they can go get surgery. Like when you see that degree of degradation, when most of the coverage about monkeypox is we shouldn't stigmatize gays for participating in mass orgies with strangers. The right to participate in mass orgies with strangers is written in the Constitution, and we should be very careful about stigmatizing this kind of antisocial behavior. When you look at that, then you start trying to construct a lifeboat out of that. And so nationalism has many different components, and what people say they are frequently bears absolutely no resemblance to what they're really all about. So plenty of people who say they're a civic nationalist, they actually believe in a strong component of racial nationalism. They just simply recognize the cues and the incentives to not express that, so they just talk in terms of civic nationalism. And so to plenty of people with racial national identity, they understand that it's completely socially unacceptable to say that out loud, but they can rally to the banner of Christ is King. What makes this so complicated is that nationalism is primarily something that is non-rational. It's an emotional feeling of connection with other members of your group, the largest group possible that you can strongly identify with. And it's also a frame of mind. And so people will use all sorts of terms, but those terms don't denote what's exactly going on. The conflict in Northern Ireland between Catholics and Protestants is not primarily a religious conflict. It's given that terminology, but what you have are two different peoples with two different ways of living, two different folk ways, and so calling it Catholic versus Protestant simply makes it easier. And so many of the people, I think, who identify as Christian nationalists, that's just a way that they can identify with a particular group that provides a possible way out of the hellscape that they see around them. And I don't think one should get too hung up on the details. Sure, there's a time and a place for getting hung up on the details. What exactly is Christian nationalism? But in the big picture, nationalism is an identification with a people